Hey, good morning, everyone. Good morning for everyone out here on the West Coast. Thanks for stopping by this session. We are going to be talking about new tools and development and distribution of games for medical education. My name is Michael Cosimini. I am an associate professor of pediatrics up here at Oregon Health and Science University. I am available to you, please, in many different ways. I'm on a lot of social media. Um, at Empiric Game for a handle. Also, my full name on X or Twitter, and that's my email address at the bottom there. So if you want to follow up on any of this stuff, you want more details, you want to collaborate on research or game design or anything, please. I am very much want to be available to people that are interested in this kind of stuff. Advance the slides. What we are going to talk about today is, first of all, why I think teaching with games is a good idea. To what games are being made now, like what card and board games are being made right now to be used for medical education, and how people are making those games, and what's really changed in the last 10 years about how games are being made and why there are so many more of them, and really get into your hands a lot of different tools that from my journey making games and from seeing how other people make games that you can use for your own sort of game design lifestyle. I am just getting a timer up here to make sure I am on time and doing things well. A lot of what I'm going to be talking about is sort of projects that have come out of this community of practice research group that we call the Gamer Collaborative. We have a webpage at mededgamer.org where we sort of post our stuff. So you're welcome to check that out. And we also have a Slack group you're welcome to join that I'll sort of pitch at the very end of this talk. As one brief financial conflict of interest, I do sell a game. I sell it at a price that it doesn't actually make net money. It kind of loses a little bit of money, but it is a conflict of interest. That is Empiric, which is a card game to teach guideline-based antibiotic use. Primarily, I'm using it for medical students and residents, but it also is for CME, and there are a few different other versions, like veterinary versions at this point. I don't want to brag too much, but very recently, I received this badge for completing my privacy basics training. So kind of a big deal. I just thought everyone should know that before we start this. Can't tell if the jokes are landing on this platform without interaction, but I hope that was enjoyable for you. Anyways, before we get into the content, and the content is going to be focused on games for medical education, I do want to do a little bit of pedantic nonsense and talk about gamification and the contrast between gamification and when that's useful versus serious games, which are sort of standalone games, which we're going to focus the bulk of things on. Gamification, I think there's been a few sessions about gamification earlier today. Gamification is the integration of game elements into non-game settings. I think this tweet is just a beautiful example of it. Alex says, my partner's new toothbrush is connected to an app and she just won a medal for brushing. What a time to be alive. I mean, that's a pretty great, clearly brushing your teeth is not a game. But they put this award, this game-like element into the toothbrushing to encourage brushing of teeth. And that's a great example of gamification. Ooh, hello, wrong direction. All right, more approximate to what we do. Here are two examples. On the left, there is a leaderboard from a conference I attended a couple of years ago. The conference organizers have this application set up that if you interact with the app, like you post a question, you answer a question, you interact with other people at the conference on the online application, this in the context of a remote conference during COVID, that you would score points. And they really wanted people to interact with each other. So they gave people points and put up a leaderboard and little awards and stuff for interacting on the app, really to motivate people to interact on the app. On the right, this is my favorite example in medical education. It's Casian. It's an application that was used for something called the ID Fellows Cup. ID Fellows Cup is a competition where groups of infectious disease fellows at different sites around the world will get together, answer board style quiz questions, and score points for answering them accurately, doing questions every day, and having full participation of their group. So putting people together in groups to score points and compete. But the core of it was really multiple choice questions with good explanations of why they're right or wrong. So gamification was applied there. The sort of framework to think about this that I think is makes it really clear of how they work is those game characteristics, like leaderboards, like badges, influence learners' behaviors and attitudes in service of the learning goals. This is a slide that was adapted by Michaela Stiver from our group for a workshop. So, for example, you get a badge for doing questions 3 days in a row. Therefore, you did more questions, and therefore, you learned from those questions. The game is really in service of getting you to do those questions. I like to think about gamification like a hat. I can take a hat off my head, and my head is still there. Somebody else can wear that same hat, and it works for them too. You could imagine that Kasian app could deliver geology questions just as easily as it could deliver infectious disease questions. That's because it's a gamification platform as opposed to a standalone game in service of that content. So just doing literature reviews, I find there's like these terms get conflated and used in a confusing way. So that's my perspective on how these terms should be used. And I still often put the keyword gamified into papers and stuff because like I want people to find them that are looking, but I would use gamification as a term to describe those sorts of behaviors where game elements are being applied to a non-game. Contrast this with a serious game. And this is where I live and this is where I focus. These are games. Excuse me, I move the chat box so I read the words correctly. Explicit and carefully thought out educational purposes that are not intended to be played primarily for amusement. This is a standalone game, an educational game, which sort of has, to some people, negative connotations because people participated in not very good ones in the past. This definition comes from an older book back when games were almost exclusively done on, paper. So I use that term serious game to refer to both digital and analog games if the game was developed for a purpose other than entertainment. Largely, for me, of course, educational, though you could have other purposes besides education of your standalone game. Ooh. So how do they work? Well, the game characteristics and the instructional content are merged together into one thing, and that one thing is the game. And people playing that game will do a thing. They'll get feedback from the game based on what they did. They will respond to that feedback, and they will do a different thing. Or maybe they'll do the same thing if it worked out well. So the core loop of the game is the teaching in a serious game or a standalone game for education. I am playing Pac-Man. I take a right. I get killed by a ghost. That didn't work out great. Let me take a left next time. That worked. We'll keep going that way. Same thing with your educational game. In the core loop, you should be learning what you want to learn. There is often a debrief in a serious game. And this is because we have to abstract things, right? Like a game is not real life. So there are things that we do in the game that are different than real life. And it's not just stating things, right? The learning comes from the play. So often serious games will have a debriefing process so that we know that we're teaching what we think that we're teaching. Why did I start teaching with games? I think it's really competitive. Competitive might not be the right word. Students have a really high standard for education. And I think giving a talk with a laptop or giving a slideshow like I'm doing right now might not be acceptable to learners at this point. There are amazing ways that medical students can learn. There are question banks. There are like mnemonic visual palace things. There are cool like AI-based like cases. There's like so many good ways for people to learn right now. And I think just sitting down and giving a talk can be good, and it can be good for certain content, but I don't think it's adequate. And I think using some kind of active learning is really important when we have the privilege of teaching our students and our residents in a small group. So I think a game is a great active learning technique for a small group. I found this photo. This is a very old photo from right when I started doing this, probably like 2020 or 2019. This was posted in the chief's office. When you have a chance to teach on the wards with a small group, if you get out a PowerPoint and start talking and one of the residents gets paged and needs to go address something, are they going to come back and finish the rest of the PowerPoint, or are they going to write their note? That's one reason, right? I think games are very helpful for engagement. Two is when you ask a question on rounds, like toxic quizzing is like a sort of a harsh straw man to use against a game, but it's a much lower stress. It is normal to get things wrong in a game. It is normal to experiment when you're playing a game. That is just fine. So when I put a card down on the table, like an antibiotic card, and I've got that question wrong, that is super normal. And it's super natural for the residents to teach each other, the students and the residents to teach each other in that kind of context. So I think games are really good for active learning. So experimentation in a psychologically safe way. They're very good for maintaining engagement. If you believe to answer that page, you've got that ceftriaxone card in your hand, you might really want to get back there and say, oh man, I saw that gonorrhea was on the table. I'm going to score a ton of points next turn, but I gotta get back from this call and get back to the game to do that. They're busy, right? They're busy. And so I think being very engaging is important. There's this term to be really, to be dorky about it, which is just fine, is this term called the magic circle. So a boundary exists between, excuse me, I'm blocking my own slides, a game and the world outside of the game. So, our expectations for how we behave socially in a game is different than how we do in other settings, like on rounds or at the bedside. And I think for that reason, it's a really easy way to deliver psychological safety. And I do think maintaining engagement. Once you start playing a game, most people want to finish the game, right? They want to complete that game. Personally, when I teach with the game, I still will set a timer on my phone and say, hey, we're going to play this for 20 minutes and then we're going to stop. So they know the kind of finite space this is going to exist in. Because I think that's just, I don't know, I think it's just appropriate for our learners to set those kind of rules upon ourselves so we're not using too much of their time. But I do think it maintains engagement. I have a question. This is, I think, a good spot for a question. I see, what are your thoughts on gaming and its potential limits for accessibility to be inclusive for all? I love games, but I find I have to go more with scenario style learning to ensure all my learners can take it. Scenario style e-learning. Well, a huge barrier to accessibility with tabletop games like this is you need to be physically present in the same room with people, which of course in like the most acute period of COVID was really difficult. And a lot of the accessibility things I think about with card and board games are, this is a great segue. I'm going to be talking about colors, right? Like differences in color vision are a big thing. Difference in vision in general is a relatively big thing. So, font sizes, color contrast kind of choices. I think mechanics can be a barrier. So for me, I think games should be extremely simple so that you're not putting a barrier to accessibility in terms of understanding of the rules and how you play the game. I might not have answered your question quite right, though. So feel free to jump back in if that's not what you wanted. That's not what you were looking for as an answer. I'm going to kind of segue here to talking about how I set up my own game. My game is a game where you teach guideline adherent antibiotic use. The way it works is there are these color-coded antibiotics, which in retrospect might not have been the best choice, but I also have pictures of how the mechanism works. So antibiotics are sort of rainbow ordered based on where they work. So ones that are working on the basic metabolic pathway, like Bactrim or trimethoprim, sulfamethoxazole, are in red, kind of working through to the cell wall, where these blue ones are ones that work on the cell wall, like beta-lactams and vancomycin. They have icons about how they're delivered. I mean, you don't usually use doxy injected, but it is available as injected or oral. And they have icons for important bugs that everyone should probably know. Like you should probably know which drugs are able to cover MRSA and which bugs cover atypical pathogens. So these are the cards: brief spectrum of activity, color-coded mechanism of action, and important bugs. And they are matched with cases. So for example, here is a dog bite. On the front of the card is a briefcase vignette, like 15-year-old who got bit by a dog. Do they need antibiotics? The card scores 3 points and it's treated with an oral antibiotic. On the back are the correct answers, which are, in this case, amoxiclav or Dogmentin, and observation. Like not all dog bites need to have an antibiotic. So if this card is on the table, you could score its 3 points by putting amoxiclav on it. And the game's mechanisms give you a bonus for using the observation card. So you get an additional 2 points there. So you score either 3 points if you have an antibiotic or 5 points if you just watch the case. At its core, people are matching cards in their hand to cases on the table. And the way you score the most points is by using antibiotics kind of at the top of their ability. So if you had ceftriaxone on your hand, you could score 5 points treating gonorrhea, or you would score 2 points if you treated an ear infection in someone who happened to be allergic to penicillin. So like Pac-Man, the first time I played the game, I used my ceftriaxone on the ear infection, and then gonorrhea comes out later, and it's like, oh man, I could have scored a lot more points if I held on to that. So the hope is that you're learning to use good, both adherent to guidelines and using them for the hardest thing they can treat to um, advance your knowledge of antibiotics and score the most points in the game. There's this term in serious games called intrinsic integration, which I really like. Materials to be learned should be integrated with the core game mechanics of the game. So in my game, let's think about that for a second. This stuff, color coding, the atypical bugs, the icons, that's not really the core teaching point. That information is there and people are passively exposed to it. But my experience is people don't really learn that part as fluidly as they do the match. The actual match, the core part of the game they score the points with, that's what they're saying. When I ask them, what did you learn today? Those are the points they're making. Not that I noticed that this was an anti-MRSA drug. The literature for intrinsic integration is fun. This is a game called Zombie Division, which is a game where you fight skeletons, which doesn't make a ton of sense as far as the name and the content. But what they have is this this digital game for school age kids where you journey through dungeons and fight skeletons, and the skeletons have numbers and your weapons have numbers, and they're kind of like thematically linked. Like there's a triangle on that shield and it's the 3 shield. So if I am fighting the 9 skeleton and there's a 3, 4, and 5 weapon available, I'm going to use the 3 weapon to smash that skeleton because 9 is divisible by 3. So the core fun part of the game, smashing the skeletons, is done in a way that's integrated with the content. They made 2 versions. Well, they made 3 versions of the game. They made this version, the integrated version. They made a second version where you smash the skeletons with the weapons, but they kind of intersperse questions about that does the exact same math as the skeleton smashing version did, but it's presented more as math. And they also had like a totally educational content free version. And what they found is in a couple different experiments, one, if you just had kids play and didn't limit their time, they would play a lot longer with the version where the content was integrated into the gameplay, as opposed to breaking up the gameplay for interspersed kind of questions. And they found that the when you limit the time and they can play the exact same amount of time and do the same number of questions as they play, they learned a lot more doing it in the skeleton smashing way as opposed to the maths way. So integrating the content into the core fun part of the game was more effective. So we should try to do that when we make our games. Another example here more recently is a Pac-Man style game where they expose people to you are Pac-Man and you're supposed to eat the little ghosts that match either your color in the non-integrated version or match your icon, the little graduation cap in the integrated version. And they quiz the kids afterwards about what icons you were exposed to in the game. And not surprisingly, people that played the game where they matched the icons as part of the game remembered more icons. As well, I was going to say the same thing. Like for me, so this is not the integrated stuff for mine. This is the integrated stuff for mine. The match that you actually make in the game, not just the content that you're exposed to. Whoa, something happened funny with my slide there. Sorry about that. This is an example that I absolutely love. It's available on Game Crafter. It is a game where you sort of journey through these coronal slices of the brain with your little pawn. So here's a little dude here. And you use these cards that say like caudal, rostral, medial, lateral, and you score points by navigating your pawn to a specific place on the board. You use cards that talk about like the words that we use for how you describe the anatomy. And it does great integration of exploring the anatomy as the core fun part of the game and that terminology. So I just love this example. And this is a game by Austin Lim, who's I think a neuroanatomy PhD. I don't know exactly what he teaches, but it's like a beautiful game to have on your table. So just in summary, kind of in the first third of this talk is games should integrate game elements and the content. They are a good form of active learning to use for our learners, and they are a low stakes trial and error kind of situation. So good thing to use. But I don't know about you, but I don't see a lot of games being used to teach in the settings where I work, at least not like true standalone games. So why are people not teaching with these right now? Sorry, I can look at my time again. Okay, perfect. So My Game Empiric is available free to print on the internet. And for a 6-month period, when people downloaded the game, I surveyed them with some questions about that exact thing. So I think like maybe over the 6-month period, 1,500, 1,600 people downloaded the game. 335 of them filled out my survey and endorsed having a healthcare sort of role. These are like primarily medical students, physicians and residents, and then pharmacists and pharmacy students were like the biggest share of these people filling out the survey. And what they said primarily is the main reason they're not teaching games right now is there are not games for them to use. The second most common reason they endorsed was there's content accuracy concerns. Like, well, if I download something from the internet and it's a game, is that really accurate? And can I use it to teach with my students? And the third most common was cost. And we'll talk a little bit more about how much these card and board games cost. And I think it's a super reasonable concern, but it was another one that was highlighted. So those are the big three, I think. There's other ones there on the page there that you can see, but people say there are not games for them to use and therefore they're not using games. So let's collectively agree we're going to fix that. When I read this, I was like, well, there are games. I have a bunch. My friends have a bunch. Up there is Friday Night in the ER, which has been around for like 30 plus years or something. There's Gridlocked, which is a well kind of described one. There are games. They're in, specific content areas, and let's explore that a little bit more. These new games have been presented in three kind of being distributed or developed with three kind of major technology groups. And this is going to get to the abstract that I submitted for this conference. The first is print and play. Print and play is like, I'm at home, I print off a piece of paper, I cut it out, and I use it as a game. The second is print on demand. This is where a third party, I as a designer, send a file to a third party. They, when someone pays for the game, will print, manufacture, put it in a nice box, and ship it to their house. And the third category is crowdfunding. Crowdfunding is essentially a way to raise money to do a project. And this will be a thing where there'll be a 20-day period where someone is asking people to put some money in on the front end so that they can develop a product and eventually ship it to them. So these three new technologies are kind of what we see being used to distribute games more recently. We did a scoping review as well, which is like still under embargo or whatever. So I would love to have shared it with you, but it's not quite published yet. But it is, we saw that basically that there are a lot more games being published in the literature, and that those games, unfortunately, when we kind of look through those articles, were not immediately available to us. So that brings us to the project is, what is the landscape of games for medical education right now? We kind of have a big crew that worked on this project because it was kind of a lot of work, and also just to kind of have different sort of experiences and ability to look for these things. We have Sarah Edwards, who distributes her own games sort of on a free to print version online. Michaela Stiver uses the Game Crafter to distribute a couple games. Vince Chan does Critical Care Game, which is shipping right now. But he's the Kickstarter expert and the crowdfunding expert on our team. And Dr. Chan there is from Gridlocked, another like one of the bigger print on demand kind of games. So we had a kind of diverse group of people that have living in different countries and also different experience with game design and distribution. What we were looking for is card and board games designed for the purpose of education of like physician track learners. So this is like medical students, residents, fellows, attendings, and that were actually available. Not just we built this thing, we used it locally, and we wrote about it in a journal. These are available to other people to use. We started with 197 articles that met full text review for that scoping review. In those 97 articles, we found 89 unique games that had names. So like the game had a name so that we could search for that game. We Googled for those games, looking for places we could buy them online. So we would search for the name of the game. We would search for the name of the game plus the search term game and try to find places that would sell these games online. And we're able to find 25 different online sources. These were kind of diverse, like board game databases, like Board Game Geek, like game vendor, like people who sell games like Amazon and Noble Knight and places like that. Odds and ends, like blogs, like all kinds of different places, like blogs that would have a link to a PDF. Lots of different places where these were distributed, and actually a big slice of them were actually end up back in the literature like MedEd portal where you get them, where you can download the files. So, and then we search inside of those sources for more games. Figured, well, if this place has got one game for medical education, maybe there'll be more there. And in the end, we found 198 game listings, though many of them did not end up meeting our inclusion criteria. They weren't for physicians, they weren't for education. They actually were digital games. They were never actually available to anyone, or an expansion to an existing game was one of the ones that we carved out there. But look at the timeline here. So there's reason to think there could be some bias in here, like things disappear from web pages. The Board Game Geek, like the big database of games, things stay there once they're there. But like those print on demand ones, someone could take them down and they would disappear, and we wouldn't have caught them in the snip of time that we were looking through this in 2023 and early 2024. But largely, we saw a big increase in games in the last 10 year. Obviously, something happened in 21, 22. I wonder what that was. But recovery nicely in 2023 in the number of games that are being released. So these are the number of games released per year, and saw that go up nicely over time. And the question we have is, like, are people using these new technologies? I'm having trouble advancing my slide. So why is there so much growth? I think it's because they're using these new technologies. MedEd Portal started in 2005. The first game that you can find in MedEd Portal was right away in 2006. Kickstarter started in 2009. Took a long time before our first example of people publishing a game on that platform, not till 2019, so a full decade later. And actually, that was not a successful Kickstarter, that first one we found. 2018 for that one. And Gamecrafter, the first like medical education game we found on there, is essentially like Trivial Pursuit for anatomy and physiology. It's like directed at nurses primarily, but their listing also says any medical professional. So we felt that they met our inclusion criteria. We have question: can you expand more on how you can go to MedEd Portal and access games for download? Do you need special access? No, that is what's so cool about it. It is free to download for anyone. So if you go to MedEd, you can get to MedEd Portal through PubMed, or you can just search inside of MedEd Portal itself. If you just throw it in Google, you'll find it. And you download this zip file that includes the article, all the like evaluation tools, and then PDFs, printable PDFs of game content. And I'll get a little bit more about my favorite example from there in a future slide. Highly recommend MedEd Portal. So when we think about the adoption of these technologies, we're thinking about for the theoretical framework for this study, we're using Rogers' diffusions of innovations. You might have like run into this in the context of those charts. You know, they say the early adopters and the laggards, and the late early adopters and the primary adoption and the laggards. You know, that chart like of adoption of new technologies. We didn't look at it in that way. Instead, he talks about factors like users' perceptions of a new technology that lead to them being adopted or not. So this can be, there's 5 that's described in the book. The first is relative advantage. Like, how does this technology compare to what you're doing right now? Like, why is it better than doing the historic thing? So in the context of games, that might be getting a bunch of them printed and shipped to your house and mailing them out yourself, or trying to find a publisher that will publish your game, going to Hasbro and say, hey, can you make a game about medical education? It was difficult, I think, before these technologies evolved for anyone to do anything with games for MedEd. The second is compatibility. Like, how does this fit into my existing lifestyle and flow and what I am doing? How does it work with what we're doing right now? The third is complexity. And remember, these are perceptions of. So does this seem to me, as someone who's not tried it yet, to be a complex thing that will influence how likely I am to take up a new technology? And then trialability. Can I try this on a limited basis, like without like risk or difficulty? Is it something I can just experiment with easily? And finally, observability. How much is it noticed by people outside of it? And so these set of 5 factors lead to the adoption or not adoption of technologies. So the first one, and the MedEd Portal one, like the question is print on play. So of those 70 some games, 26 of them were distributed in a print and play model. This, again, is a digital file that someone can download from the internet, print out, laminate or not, cut or not, and play at home. So Meted Portal was a big slice of these. I think there were 12 in Meted Portal, but there's other ones just hosted on the internet or in Dropboxes or in Drive files that people could download it. So this was the most adopted of those three new technologies. Here's a couple games I downloaded. Vax Bracket is one I got. This is like a playtest copy from when they were developing it. And on the right there is Cards Against Pediatric Dermatology, which is like a very simple matching game with cards where you match rashes to their treatment and pathologies and stuff like that. My favorite example of a print and play game is this is a Meted Portal example. It's called Clinical Coaching Cards. It is a player judge sort of style game, which means like if you've played Apples to Apples or Cards Against Humanity, it will take you 0 seconds to figure out how to play this game. Basically, what happens is players take turns being the judge. They will say a clinical teaching challenge that they have. So, for example, my learners usually think of what they think is most likely, and then they don't kind of think of a broader differential diagnosis for a case. Every other player at the table will take a card from their hand, which are just a list of teaching techniques, and say, oh, when that happens, I like to use 1 minute preceptor, or I like to use the muddiest point. So which teaching tool would I use to address that challenge? And then everyone argues about which one is the best. The judge picks one that is the best, and they set that aside. And at the end of the game, they look through all the ones that they've collected, they've selected for their own teaching challenges for them to use going forward. This one was published in Meted Portal. You can download and print it today. They really emphasize in their manuscript that this sort of flattens the hierarchy. What they wanted to do with this is make it easy for more senior educators and more junior educators to discuss things in a very level playing field sort of way, so that they could kind of teach each other. This is my game, which I also distribute as a free to print. I think gives you one of the good advantages. Like here's a copy in Saudi Arabia on the left and a copy in Brazil on the right. It is Brazil in particular is a nightmare to ship to, and it's very hard to get games there. So giving it out as a PDF is a very easy way for people to get it and play it in a larger sort of framework than you would with other methods of distributing games. And actually someone's subsequently translated a version to Portuguese for that purpose as well. And I don't really sell copies to Brazil because it's a $50 shipping to get it sent there from my printer. What is the impact? And this is really, I think, big grain of salt kind of data. Meted Portal talks about number of downloads, but they don't really distinguish. You download everything together. So, these are a number of downloads of the files and the article. And odds are lots of games get printed and never get cut out and played. So lots of downloads of these, going up to at least 3 games. When asking people how many had been downloaded or looking at the stats on Meted Portal, at least 3 games have been downloaded 1,000 times or more. But who knows how many copies are actually out there floating in the world of the print and plays. So this technology is, I think, a great one for people to use. It is a very low complexity, low cost. And I think if you are a designer of games, publishing it in a journal might serve a double purpose, right? If you need publications for your CV, or if you like where I work, where, having your stuff in national repositories is good on your CV as well. Going for Meted Portal is probably a reasonable thing to do if you have a game that you'd like to share in a wider audience. So this in the darker area here is thought process for the designer. For the user, I think, concerns are like it is effort to build the game. It is limited in scope, right? Like you are not going to make a huge game as a free print and play, right? But a card game might be easy to do. And the big bonus I'm joking there is because there's no shipping, but free shipping, right? Like it can get anywhere easily. All right, next game style. Oh no, not next game style. This is a tool that I love. It's called P&P Buddy, which means Print and Play Buddy. It is an online application where you upload image files of your cards and it puts them into printable sheets that makes it very easy to print your game. I used to do this by hand and it was a nightmare. This has really made it a lot easier, and there'll be a link to that later. And by later, I mean right now. Sorry, I rearranged these slides at the last second. So I was when I sent this in, I was told to do something interactive. Now we're on a platform where it's not super easy to be interactive, but we're going to do a little quick draw challenge for our Western themed slideshow today. And if you've played the card game Bang, that's where this card is from. So what I would like you to do is get your phone out and turn it onto the camera mode. And then in a couple seconds, I'm going to switch to the next slide and give you a challenge. Okay. about how you can to help you make your own game. All right, cameras ready? Hit that QR code. It's going to take you to a big game design resource list and find an icon that you could use to represent the lungs. I can do it too. Oh, got to scroll back past a couple guides. Let's try gameicons.net. Lung. So there's an icon I could use in the game for lungs. It is a Creative Commons 3.0 license, so I think that will mean I have to attribute it, but I'm able to use it. I just want to bring it, like, have an excuse to bring you to that page. That print and play buddy thing is on there. A couple different places where you can print icons are there. Lots of different stuff. If you're not on your phone here, that mededgamer.org is all one word. Mededgamer.org has all those resources for you. You got one? Now I've distracted you. You'll be on social media for the rest of the talk. All right. Here's a bunch of different lungs I found doing this when I was prepping it. For me, I also just use, like, because of the, having to do attribution in the Creative Commons, which I don't love having to do, there are some resources that are totally free to use and totally you can just do whatever with. I often make my icons either in Keynote, which is the Mac sort of version of PowerPoint, or you can use vector editing software too to make, for the nicer ones, I use that. But for the ones that are just on a single card, I'll just throw them together in Keynote. Category number 2 was print on demand. So this is the service. I think the bulk of these are on the Game Crafter, which is a company that you can make basically any type of game. They can do just about everything, pawns and dice and boards and pads of paper and cards and whatever you can imagine, or drive-through cards, which is where I do mine, which just prints cards. These are companies where you as a designer send them files and describe what you want, and people who want the game, including you, can send money to the company. They'll print it out, box it up, and ship it. Takes a while, but it's being done fairly commonly. Notable example is the Legion. 1,400 copies of this have been truly printed and distributed to people in the world. It's been around since 2015, and it's an early and strong example of using print-on-demand services to share games. So this is a game where you find the level of a Legion and what kind of, they have these Victorian-ish pictures of people with palsies and stuff, and you try to figure out where in the nervous system could explain the symptoms that these people have. Cool looking game. This is by Zachary London, who has a ton of games available through this Game Crafter. And you can just look at the prices. I want to show, like, $45. Like, so if you're going to use that yourself with your small group of teachers, that great. If you're going to try to extrapolate that to a classroom of 60 people or something, that starts to get to be a really big number. So they do cost money to make, and because they're not made at bulk, they cost more, or they should cost more on average than sort of mass produced games would for the same components. He told me that they spend hundreds to a few thousands of dollars on art costs on these as well on the backside. I think they use grant money for this, so this isn't money that they recover with the sales. But it takes a little bit of work to make these nice games, even if you're not the one printing and shipping them. Another great example that popped up over and over and over again in the scoping review is Gridlocked, because they've published a lot on it. It's this sort of sprawling sim of the emergency room where they sort of demonstrate challenges in emergency room throughput. I've put a banana on my copy for scale there. And there's quite a few publications about it as well, but it's another example that's distributed in the Game Crafter. I think it's like $80 or something. It's a little bit pricey because you get a lot in the box, and because it's on this print-on-demand system. I threw one more example in here, but this is not in the games. It is not in the survey, but I think this print-on-demand model is being used not just for games, but much, much more commonly for books, right? And so this is like an Amazon print-on-demand kind of service. Learn Antibiotics. It's a game with it's a book with some games in it. And I sort of just think, are there good games I could make in the book format? Because there's well-trod ground on print-on-demand books that are affordable, and I think that's a good way to go. This is much more accurate data, probably. So the print on demand, this is very accurate data, I should say. The print on demand companies have little badges on their games that tell us how many copies have been sold through the platform. And actually, that one example I gave you with 1,000 copies is the only example of the game that's sold 1,000 or copies or more in the in that sort of model. Mine are mostly in this sort of 250 to 500 copy range, but there are a lot of ones. People put a lot of effort into this game, and then like less than 10 copies are sold, and we can kind of see that clearly on the Game Crafter webpage. That some really cool stuff has been made, but does not get widely distributed. I told you these should be expensive, and I would think that they would be. And compared to printing 2,000 copies overseas, they are much more expensive to make for what you get. But when we compared them to the other games in the sample that were not distributed on a print on demand, the average cost of them was pretty similar. And maybe that's because they're smaller or maybe other factors. But they are, in the $40 range was the average. We saw one as high as $400, which is this really cool NRP, neonatal resuscitation simulator board game, which is also on the Game Crafter. Okay, so I got a question. I think we're at oh, wait, we'll finish this. So print on demand is sort of, medium for complexity. It's harder than throwing files on the internet, but it's not that complicated. It's still low cost. And for me, I don't, I'd make everything myself, so I don't pay any money to do what I do. The costs are mostly the printing of the games and giving them out to friends and people that help develop the game. But to the user, they may be expensive and they're definitely slow. There's like a few week lag to get any of these games from when you order them, which is challenging for those of us that are accustomed to ordering games on Amazon and getting them the next day, or walking to the game store and taking them home the same day. We have a question about are there games that are easily available based on AI? I was at what was it? IAMSE, and the sketchy people I know have a cool sort of AI powered sort of, it's not a game as much as a module. But I don't know. The only place I use AI for is kind of in the development process. Like I'm working on one about infectious diarrhea. So I've like asking ChatGTP to play with me because it's a yes, no sort of quiz game, and it can practice with me. So it's kind of, there's some interesting play testing you can do with AI or just generating quick content, but I'm not sure about like based on AI only games that are out there. I don't do as much digital stuff. Aside from physical and print on demand games, you find education effective online or mobile meta games that were fun and enjoyable? Not for the purposes of this study. You know what I like for mobile games? Well, there's Sepsis Tetris is kind of a cool one, and I think they had something over the noon or at the prior to this session that you can check out. EKG Stampede is one that I really like. It's like it's a mobile app game for like, is this an EKG scary or not scary sort of decision making process. I'm blanking on the name. Eric Gantworker is a PEDS ENT that works with a company that has a tons of games. Level X has a bunch of mobile games. They've got a really good Derm one that I'm blanking on the name of that I like. So those are some of the ones that I use. I don't do as much. Like personally, I don't do as much mobile. I don't make my own mobile games or anything, but there's definitely some interesting stuff happening. It's really interesting. We did a review of all the games available for neurology education and found that there had been a lot of like MedEd portal games for neurology, but they were like, DOS files or Flash, which is no longer supported. So I think there's a challenge in maintenance of these games. Oh, and I should mention there's a game called Medimon, which is coming out very soon. I've got one of their cards here. They gave a talk earlier today, which is a digital game. It's like Pokemon, but like the sort of visual palace mnemonics and stuff to teach like a preclinical med-ed sort of game. So yeah, there's definitely digital stuff out there, but not my domain as much. So the final category of sort of these new techs is crowdfunding, which we did not see much adoption of. So we only found 3 games that used crowdfunding, only 2 of which actually successfully funded. There are a lot of platforms. Kickstarter is the biggest. GameFound is sort of the emerging one, but there's also Indiegogo as a classic and BackerKit. All the examples we found were on Kickstarter. Kickstarter is a big way to do games. It is growing. So in the real world, games that are being made for not education purposes, just regular card and board games are definitely being done on Kickstarter. Why? So here's my games pricing out my game in a couple different ways. Using my print on demand company, which is a card exclusive one, they're about $9 a copy to print if I make a single copy. And that doesn't change much. It gets down to like $7 if I make 5,000 copies. Another company, Game Crafter, which you talked about a bunch, is kind of a similar sort of spread with declining price with volume, but only modestly. But if I go and get a quote from a manufacturer overseas to have them printed overseas, they get less than $2 a copy when you get to, north of 2,000 copies. So by working at scale, you can get much lower cost per copy printed. And this is like well-trod ground for, hobby game designers. And that's why people use Kickstarter for hobby games, is to raise enough money to print 2,000 copies of their game so their game can be made in an affordable fashion, when it would be absolutely crazy to print 2,000 copies in mass from one of these print-on-demand companies. The example really is Farmageddon, which is this lovely antibiotic card game where you match bugs to drugs. It's a little bit different than mine in that it focuses more on the full spectrum of activity of the antibiotics as opposed to the guideline specific stuff. So maybe a little bit more of a preclinical or a very crunchy, knowledgeable sort of range. It's like interesting on both ends of this. This is a game that raised $18,000 from 466 people to make it the game. And Scott Crabtree, who made this game, actually kind of gave a breakdown of his costs on the webpage, saying that he spent about $4,000 on art, about $4,000 on manufacturing, and then check it out, about $4,000 on shipping. So when I showed you that the game could be less than $2 a copy to be manufactured, that's for it to be manufactured and stored in a warehouse in China. And it's going to cost, maybe just as much again to get them over here to the States. And that's been moving a lot. And shipping prices really spiked a couple of years back, and it's a moving target. But you need to raise a lot of money to make a lot of copies of a game, and crowdfunding is one way to do that. Distribution of how many copies were distributed. We know Farmageddon is done with its first 1,000 print run, and they're printing more copies. One of the games did not back on crowdfunding, so it didn't do any. And the other one, at least as far as we can tell from the webpage, had at least 100 copies made. Crowdfunding is very complex. It still costs money, right? He spent $4,000 on art. And you really, like in 2024, if you're doing a Kickstarter, it's not just like you read an idea on a sticky note and you put it online. People are usually buying art and developing most of the game and incurring costs before they get that money raised. And Kickstarter takes 10%. It's a big ordeal as a designer, but it is a way to go to scale. If you have a game that can go to scale, it's very slow for the backers, and there's some games that I've backed that I don't even have yet. But it is a way to deliver a very high quality product. Another great example is Critical Care Game, which is arriving at people's houses as we speak. They're lucky. I mean, you guys are lucky that my copy hadn't arrived yet. Otherwise, this talk would just be me talking about that the whole time. Because I'm excited to open it. Those are their boxes in Boston right now being shipped out. I'm getting late on time, so I'm not going to talk too much about this. This is traditional publication methods. Focus is a game company that is based out of the UK that kind of does a more traditional kind of works with you develop and distribute a game. But they kind of were a pretty big slice of ours, and they were willing to share their numbers about how many copies they got out. They've gotten a lot of copies out. This traditional, quote unquote, traditional publishing is not well defined for the data set we were able to get. So, I'm just throwing everything that didn't hit one of those other three categories in this bag. And there are pretty, widely developed, widely distributed, had pretty big impact. But the caveat is these are numbers provided by manufacturers. And I might be missing games that tried this and failed because I might not find them if they weren't successful. So, or were smaller. So a little bit of caveat there, but it's an option too. Low on time here, but the content was very focused, actually. A lot of ID, neurology, emergency medicine, peds, and anatomy games are out there. A lot less in any other content area. So if you're in another zone, make it and share it, please. And then I put up that QR code, but there are a lot of resources we have for guides for how to develop games, printing layout tools, places to get images, and then resources that I like for developing tabletop games. I don't want it to sound so complicated. These are the very first draft of Empiric here, which was just exclusively done in Keynote while my wife was watching the time traveling nurse in Scotland. Outlander. She was watching Outlander. It was boring. So I made this in one night. Like it's very quick. Oh, there's my timer that I'm running low on time. Um, and that top left one is one of the ones I made cheapier just with icons from the internet and matching treatments, which is pretty well received by medical students. Doesn't need to be complicated, guys. Last tool I wanted to talk about is turning spreadsheets into cards. This example is InDesign, which is kind of an expensive and annoying piece of software, but it can do some cool stuff where I took a spreadsheet of development milestones and printed them onto cards. And then when the AAP changes the development milestones, it's pretty easy to update those fields and generate the card. So it turns a spreadsheet into cards, and that's a way to do it. There are more, the InDesign and data merge is an expensive way to do it, but there's a free version for PC called Nandeck where you sort of code your cards and can use spreadsheets, and Multideck is software for Mac that does something similar. The take-home points I wanted to say is, hey, it's much easier to make a game than it used to be in the past. Designers have adopted probably the lower complexity tools more than the higher complexity tools for reasons I think are apparent. And I think you guys could easily make something. And hopefully I'm providing you with resources that will make that easier. Well, the QR code isn't here. Shameful. That link broke. Okay, I will stop sharing for a second. If you email me, oh, you can't see my chat, can you? If you email me at cosimini@ohsu.edu, you can, I will definitely send you a link to our Slack group if you'd like to join our group. And if you go to mededgamer.org, all those resources are there. So mededgamer.org, and my last name is cosimini at ohsu.edu. Let me just bring up that URL on the screen too, so that you can see it. I would love any questions that we have time for. If anyone wants to throw anything in the chat, or I'm happy to take them sort of asynchronously as well.
We don't have any other questions right now. A couple people wanted your email, which has been put in the chat. So
oh, good, thanks. Do you mind throwing the mededgamer.org in the chat too, just so
it's in there as well.
That? And then yeah, people are like, we have like a community of practice that does, fights with each other about definitions and works on developing games with each other and does little research projects and workshops. And there's people in lots of different places in the country. So depending where you are, happy to like point you in the direction of someone that can do something locally with you. We do kids' birthday parties, whatever. So we'd love to kind of build this. I'm sort of trying to build up the community of people who make card and board games for education so that we have these for our learners.
One more question came in. Do you have any experience with Lego Serious Play?
No, I've gosh, they talk about that on the Professor Game podcast, which I listened to, but I've not dug into that. I'm curious though.
I think those are all the questions we have, and I think we're at time right now.
Perfect.
Great. So thank you so much. And thank you for everybody for attending, and enjoy the rest of your day. And we have some great sessions coming up as well.
All right. Thank you very much. Have a good one.
Thank you.